the United States military shooting down drones operated by Mexican cartels after they entered U.S. airspace near the southern border today. Joining me now to discuss these developments, our panelist Jason Palmer, co-founder of Together, and former Ohio Republican Congressman Bob McEwen. Great to have you both back with us. So the Trump administration says the military shooting down these drones operated by Mexican cartels after entering U.S. airspace. Jason, is there a real concern about cartel drone activity along the border? You're from the border state of California.
Well, now I live in Maryland. Before I was in California. But I would say that there have been drone incursions across the border for a while now, actually. And definitely our Department of Defense has been working on both laser technology, jamming technology. The issue here is that they weren't coordinating enough with the FAA. And so the FAA had to close that airspace. But this is actually a real problem, and drone technology is going to be continuing to improve and be a serious concern for us that we need to be up on. But we need to have coordination between different agencies so that we don't have a disaster.
Congressman, obviously during your time in Congress, different laws, different legislation evolving when it comes to drones. Have these drones become a significant part of the cartel's arsenal? And how are they using them, and what can be done to prevent them?
Well, it's hard to overstate the significance of it. As you know, with facial recognition, you can send a drone into a stadium of 80,000 people, pick out the person, assassinate the one that you want. So we're on the edge of a very critical time. Of course, we'll deal with it as we have with all technology. But as was explained just seconds ago, is very, very correct. And that is that the FAA, I think, may have overreacted. It is up to the Department of Defense to protect the country. And once the Department of Transportation, which oversees the FAA, stepped in at 10 o'clock this morning and undid the ruling. But it is a concern that we have to have, and that is that people can sit back at home and they don't have to come across the border as they've done in recent years, but they can actually send their missions, and they can also deliver drugs, but they can also do damage.
Now, switching gears, the House of Representatives just passing the Save America Act in the House, 218 to 213. It's a bill that ultimately requires proof of citizenship for for voter registration, as well as photo ID at the polls. Here's a soundbite from the Speaker of the House.
By voting for the Save America Act, House Republicans did exactly what the American people sent us here to do. This is about a 90-10 issue in the polling, because all that we've done tonight in this simple piece of legislation is apply common sense.
Jason, notably one Democrat, that's Congressman Henry Cuellar from the border state of Texas, voting with Republicans to pass the bill. Is this a necessary step in ensuring election integrity?
I do actually think we need to work together on this issue. I was sad to see that it was such a partisan vote, and the SAVE Act is partisan. Ultimately, the elections that are going to be coming up in 2026 and 2028, they're run at the local level and the state level. And so passing this at the federal level is actually not going to make much of a difference. But there is a chance to come up with a compromise here, and I hope that the legislators will work together, because there should be some type of identification that's needed to actually vote in person. I'm a rare Democrat who believes that. But at the same time, we need to make it easier to do fraud-proof mail-in voting and all the other things that are also popular among the American people. There's a bipartisan compromise that's possible here, and I hope they work towards it. But I also know this is not really a year for bipartisanship, except for a few people like me and Bob.
Congressman, some Democrats say the bill would disenfranchise millions of voters. Former President Obama just taking to his X account. We've heard from former Vice President Kamala Harris with a variety of thoughts on this. What do you say to that argument?
Well, I think it is so demeaning to say that certain people can't have an identification on themselves. As you know, identification is required for anything. If they want to skew the elections, if they want to have people who are not citizens vote, and that's many Democrats feel that way. As you know, they've approved it in the District of Columbia. You do not have to be a citizen to vote, which means that the folks in the Chinese embassy can choose the mayor of Washington, D.C. But what they're saying, what the Congress is saying here, that on federal elections, we only want Americans to vote. And now how anyone can be opposed to that, it's hard to grasp. Certainly the Democrat Party would not be that way for the 240 years of our history. So this is a new phenomenon, the idea that in California, for example, they passed a law that it is against the law for a poll official to ask a person, are you an American? Now, it's hard for us from the Midwest to grasp this sort of thing. That is that if you're a citizen, if you're in this country, that you should, only the citizens should be allowed to vote. And every country on earth is able to do it and have an ID. And of course, then we do it rapidly. And Japan just had their elections on Sunday, and they counted every vote in the whole country in 8 hours. So this idea of having write-in votes in Oregon and Washington State, that since they were able to do that, and you can have all these ballots come in from all these various addresses, you can't prove who the person is. Since that happened, no statewide Republicans have been elected in those states. We see what's happening in California, where they've actually done away that Republicans now are not even on the statewide ballot. It takes the two highest, and they run against each other, and that's been Democrats for governor and senator. So what their goal is to politically succeed, and the way that they do it is corrupt the voting system. And one of the ways that you prevent that from happening is to say that in order to vote, you have to prove that you're a citizen, and this is where you live. And most of the country is like that. So if you're from Florida or from Ohio or from Texas, you think, well, what's the problem? But what you realize is that many of these states are moving to the point where they let anybody vote, and this bill was to prevent that. And the idea that any member of Congress can stand up and say, I don't think you should have to show that you're an American in order to vote. I just can't grasp how you support that position.
Now, lawmakers are gearing up for another vote on a measure that would ultimately roll back President Trump's tariffs on Canada. A few Republicans joining Democrats in a procedural vote to bring the measure to the floor. Jason, when push comes to shove, do you expect those Republicans will still vote in line with their caucus, or are they going to take sides with the Democrats?
I think those Republicans are going to stick with opposing these Canadian tariffs. Canada is one of our most, next door neighbor allies. They've been fighting alongside us since World War II, all the way through Afghanistan. They are our friends and allies, to the utmost. And congressmen like Thomas Massey, Brian Fitzpatrick, who actually leads the Problem Solvers Caucus, these are people with backbone, people who believe in what's right for America. President Trump is right that we should have tariffs on countries like China that are our adversary in certain ways, but we should not be pushing all these crazy tariffs on our allies. Everybody in the world knows that this is just Donald Trump gone mad. He's the mad king here. And it's good that Republicans are standing up to stop him, quite honestly, on something that's so obvious.
But Jason, just to follow up, what do you say, though, to the argument that the president, as you said, it's okay to do it to China for national security, for whatever reason, to compete with them, but that he's seeing Canada inching closer to China and about to sign a massive deal there that would be not in the best interest of the United States. Therefore, he's using these tariffs on Canada as leverage to perhaps bring them back to becoming that ally that you spoke about, that we have been for so many years.
Part of why Canada is reaching out to China is because the United States has not been behaving under the Trump administration the way we have for the last 100 years of our existence, actually even longer than that. The right way to work with a neighbor is with honey, not with a stick. I'm probably mixing metaphors there. But Trump is not pursuing the right course with Canada. He should be approaching them with an open hand. When he says that the reason for these tariffs is because fentanyl is coming across the border, it's completely ludicrous. 0.1% of the fentanyl that comes to America came across the Canadian border. So he can't even keep his facts straight when it comes to Canada. Canada's our ally. We should be working with them. There shouldn't be tariffs, period.
Congressman, President Trump taking to his Truth Social account this evening, saying any Republican who votes against the tariffs will be facing consequences in elections. How do you see this playing out?
Well, indeed, that was the source of revenue for our country for most of our history. And what has happened is that particularly since World War II, that all of our allies have had significant sanctions against American products, and not sanctions, pardon me, tariffs. And we've just absorbed all that. Now, let me two quick examples. Of course, you know about what's happening with pharmaceuticals, where we're paying $160, $230 for the same pill that they're paying 10 cents for, or $1 for. And so what he said to the pharmaceuticals last week was, you don't charge us any more than you charge them. And every one of them agreed to it because they knew it was right, but they just needed some leader to force them. So couldn't do it on its own, or Merck couldn't do it on its own, but when he provided that leadership, it happened. The same thing is happening with the tariffs. You stand on a street corner in Tokyo, in London, in Berlin, in Paris, you won't see a single American car. Why? Well, they simply have a 38% tariff on it. And so Donald Trump said, well, that's a good number. We can do that. And so why don't we put a 38% tariff on German cars? And my wife and I happened to be in Brussels at the European Union the day that they get this, the German Automobile Manufacturers Association. That's in Volkswagen and Mercedes and Audi and all of the rest. When Volkswagen, when they joined together to make a proposal that they drop the tariff on American cars to zero. Now, the question would be, why did they do that? Because George Bush sent him a postcard? Because Barack Obama stood up and said Americans are arrogant and mean? No, they did it because a 38% tariff on their products would be devastating for them. And so what happens? They wanted to drop the tariff on American cars. So if you're from Youngstown or Cleveland or Dayton, Ohio, you care about what has happened for 30 years when they treated us one way and we never had any leadership in Washington that did it the other. Now, Canada.
I have to interject for a second, Bob. You're talking about Germany and Japan. This is Canada. Donald Trump put the tariffs with Canada. We've lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs here in America because there's so much cross-border collaboration between our car companies and the people in Canada. You know that this Canadian tariff is not a good idea. It's different than Japan or Germany.
Jason, you heard me say in Canada, and that's when you interjected yourself because you knew the point that I'm going to make. And that is that we have protected that country so significantly. For example, their defense is less than 0.5% of GDP. And every time that we've tried to treat them as an ally, as they were for most of our history, under Trudeau, and then this prime minister is going to be worse, he is viciously opposed to American leadership in the world and brags about it. So what the president is dealing with the cards that we've been dealt in a manner to bring them to the table. And the last thing we should do is to stab him in the back in the process, because what they've done with auto manufacture, what they've done with milk, what they've done with agricultural products, what they've done with rare earth minerals, Canada has been having a great time, and America has been taking it on the chin. And now what we're going to do is go back to having it fair, but only if I have an American that's willing to put America first.
Yeah. Well, we greatly appreciate the discussion. Very important topic indeed. Congressman Bob McEwen, Jason Palmer, really appreciate you both coming on.